It's the windiest picnic ever! Hi guys, and welcome to this week's video. If you're new, my name is Charlie Lamdin. I am a father of two, soon to be three children. I run a property software business called Best Agent, and I am an amateur private pilot with about 630 odd hours over the last 10 years. I own a Cessna 182 in England, and I have a share with 5 other people in a Cessna 180 seaplane in Norway. And in this video, I'd like to talk about the extraordinary reaction to my last video, which was the first time I took Archie flying in the seaplane in Norway, or tried to. It's a video about the flight that should never have happened and why. And the reaction has been enormous, both in the number of views. It's more than tripled my previous record for the number of views in this time. It's had thousands of views already, which I just was completely shocked by. And I've had so many messages and comments, and I wanted to address the main questions that have been raised in the comments and messages that I've had. Before we get into it, I'd like to recap the whole reason for this channel. This is my personal YouTube channel, and it is a video diary. First and foremost, it's a personal video diary of the things that are happening in my life that I'd like to record. And there are already videos of things that I would have forgotten otherwise. So it's fantastic. And its first purpose is as a video diary that I can look back at and the rest of my family can look back at. So my extended family around the world can keep up with what I'm doing. I share it publicly for a couple of reasons. Number one, on the aviation side, I have enjoyed other people's flying channels. And so I'm giving my bit back and sharing what I can from my aviation adventures, and on the vast majority of feedback I get is positive, and people say thank you and that they like it and they're learning from it, and there's always a few that don't. The second thing that's been a big surprise is the amount that I have learnt about my own flying only because I've recorded these flights and then edited them. And this leads me into the purpose of this video. Big lesson I learnt from the video of the first time I tried to take Archie up in the seaplane in Norway was a lesson that would have completely escaped me if I hadn't made a YouTube video about it. Because it was only by going through the footage of that day 6 months later, with the benefit of hindsight and calm observation, that I was able to actually see what happened that day and just how bad it was. I'd already forgotten most of the details of that day. I just remembered it as a really terrible day in the seaplane. That's all I remembered. I didn't remember much of the detail at all. So one of the things I want to talk about today is whether or not filming flights for YouTube is dangerous or safe or both. The mission that I'm recording in this channel is my dream of taking my family around the world in a seaplane. To make that dream come true, an awful lot of things need to happen. My business needs to succeed. I need to do a lot more flying, get a lot more experience. I would say 90% of my 100 and something hours on floats has actually been done in Maine and Alaska and Florida in the USA. I've flown at Jack Brown Seaplane Base. I've flown most of it in and around the lakes of Maine, around Greenville in that area, and a little bit with Alaska Floats and Skis in Talkeetna with Don Lee. So with that background of who I am, what the channel is about, the rest of this video is going to be talking about what went wrong the day that Archie and I went flying for the first time in that seaplane. Me and Archie are down here for our first seaplane flight this morning, but we've already got complications. These are the complications that you don't get with normal flying, just with seaplane flying. And so when the opportunity arose to become a part owner in a seaplane in Norway, one of the most beautiful countries in the world, I jumped at the chance. This was my chance to actually build some time on floats without having to go across the Atlantic every time I wanted to do it, which I've been doing twice a year before pre-COVID, twice a year, every year since 2014. This trip with Archie was my second trip from England to Norway, specifically to fly a seaplane. My first trip, I went out there on my own. I spent 3 or 4 days with other pilots, all much more experienced than me, all commercial pilots, in the plane, familiarising, getting some informal instruction, learning the procedures for seaplanes in Norway, and getting familiar with the places I might be going, that kind of stuff. And I then got to take my daughter Clara for several magical flights. And if you haven't seen those videos, go and pick one. Pick one or two. There's the Glacier flight. There's the day the dream came true of actually going somewhere for the first time with my daughter. There were a few little niggles and complications, but nothing went wrong. It was all very successful. There are challenges in seaplane flying that you just don't get on land planes. And that is reflected in the comments that I got from seaplane pilots as opposed to non-seaplane pilots. Hands up, absolutely no question of the fact that I was not in a fit state to fly that day, at that time. My seaplane skills themselves weren't in question. Even the crappy docking, believe me, that happens to even the best seaplane pilots. I saw some very experienced commercial seaplane pilots make a similar mistake when docking that plane at that dock a few weeks earlier. The question in my mind is, what happened that led to me failing to recognise that I wasn't fit to fly? That's the only question that matters as far as I'm concerned. Why did I not recognise myself as not fit to fly? Well, with the context of the reason for this channel and my dream of taking my family around the world in a seaplane and my current mission to build seaplane experience, I have to fight for the time and the opportunity for every single seaplane hour I get. So when I have a whole day that I've put aside for flying seaplanes, and I've already run out of time because there's been lots of unexpected delays that day, which I didn't bother going into detail with, but there were many unexpected delays outside my control, and we were running out of time. But I was physically fit. Up until that point, I was mentally fit. There was nothing wrong with the plane. It simply didn't occur to me to call myself unfit to fly that day. I'm not averse to calling myself unfit to fly, which is, again, why I'm so curious as to why that day I failed it. Number one, it was what I'm calling my overcommitment to the mission, which existed because of how much I struggle to get seaplane time. Number two, which is ironic because he fell asleep anyway, was my commitment to taking Archie up in the seaplane. Because Clara had had 3 magical days of seaplane flying and got to fly the plane herself a bit. And I felt an obligation to Archie to get him up there because he had been so excited about it. And of course he fell asleep. And I put him in danger by flying that day at all. And it is a second reason that is not an excuse for flying that day. But the third sequence or link in the sequence of events that led to this flight happening when it shouldn't have happened was the time pressure I put myself under because I had those guys helping me on the dock. They'd come along, they'd helped me, they'd both spent 20 minutes on someone else's clock helping me out, and I rushed things. I've had a lot of reaction. As at today, which is 4 days I think since I published the video, I've had 66 comments on various Facebook groups and on YouTube about this flight. Now, what's interesting is the difference in feedback between the seaplane flying community and non-seaplane pilots. Overall, I had 44 supportive, encouraging comments. Thank you for sharing. Brave of you to share. Helps us learn from your mistakes. Wow, that was a tough day. Glad you learned from it. Glad you're okay. Generally very supportive comments from other pilots. And I've had 22 negative comments. Comments like, you shouldn't be flying, you should never take your family flying, why don't you stop flying? So when I say negative, I mean really negative ones, not just constructive criticism, which I take as a positive, but actual just negative, unconstructive comments. On the seaplane flying groups, 90% of the comments were positive and only 10% were negative. Of the non-seaplane flying groups, it was 50-50. I had 50% very supportive comments, 50% very negative comments. And on the YouTube comments under the video itself, I had 14 positive and 9 negative comments. But of the negative comments, and thank you everyone who made a positive comment. And in fact, there's one comment on the YouTube comments which I want to read out because it's from a seaplane instructor. So one of the things that I look at in comments is how qualified is this person to make the observation they're making. And it's really nice when people say, hey, I'm an instructor, I'm a seaplane instructor, I'm a commercial pilot, whatever. I then know the background of that person's opinion and observations. A lot of the negative comments, well, there were mainly two things. Number one, they were, you need more instruction. Well, I respectfully disagree. Of course, everyone always needs more instruction, and I plan to get more instruction. I will never stop getting instruction wherever I have the opportunity to get instruction. I do not consider myself someone that doesn't need instruction. I think all pilots need instruction. Lack of instruction wasn't the cause of the problem that day. I had, in 3 weeks previously, had quite a few hours flying dual in that plane with very experienced commercial pilots. A lack of instruction wasn't the reason I was overcommitted to the mission that day, and it wasn't the reason that I was in a hurry, and it wasn't the reason I left Archie's door unlocked, and it wasn't the reason I was flying cross-controlled, okay? Which are the things that went wrong. The other thing in the negative comments is all about the fact that people seem to think that the primary cause of what went wrong that day was because I was filming it for YouTube. I find this laughable. I flew 2 days ago for the first time in a while, and I filmed the whole thing, including the setting up of the cameras, if you like, so to speak. And I'm going to publish that flight in real time live, and I'd like people to watch it and tell me which parts they think during the flight are any distraction caused by YouTube. Because what happens when you record a flight is you set the cameras and everything up before the flight, before you get in the plane, before you start the engine, okay? And once they're set and running, you just forget them. You set them and forget them. And there is no point during flight at which I am worrying about YouTube. I don't worry about what gets said or what happens on there. Occasionally, if there's time, I'll talk, just as I talk to a passenger in the plane. But that's not taking my concentration or focus away any more than a passenger would. And yes, there is the risk that setting up cameras on a plane can distract you from your pre-flight responsibilities as a pilot. That is true. And I noticed that when I very first started doing YouTube, which is why I now keep it as a very, very separate thing. I set the cameras up first if I want to record a flight. Cameras are set up first, then I forget them. I find this whole, oh, well, if you weren't concentrating on YouTube, it wouldn't have happened. No, that's just rubbish. It really is rubbish. And if you really believe that, you wouldn't watch any pilots' YouTube channels, because you'd be contributing to the danger of them filming. You'd be part of the demand causing it. So I find it a faintly ridiculous concept that they think that anyone thinks that could be the case. I can tell you that in the 12 years I've been flying, I've learned more in the last year as a pilot, and I have grown more in the last year as a pilot, precisely because of YouTube, than I would have done if I wasn't filming it.
Aren't they beautiful?
Thank you for watching this far. It's been a long ramble, I know. I'd like to finish with this. Two of the people who reached out to me as a result of that video with me making that mistake. It's from a man I don't know, haven't heard of before. His name is Mike Weinfurter, who says this: as a seaplane instructor, I'd say you learned a few things on that flight. There are good days and better days flying, and that was a good day because you're both in fine shape and the aircraft can be reused without repairs. Heck, you didn't even get wet or fall in. If you haven't already, you may want to review wind turns and plough turns while taxiing. That's a great suggestion. By the way, every seaplane school I've been to so far has not wanted to instruct plough turns because they are high engine power at low speed and therefore bad for the engine and makes the engine overheat very quickly. So I have not had any instruction in 100 hours about doing plough turns, and I'd love to get some. That, along with elevator position taxiing with a strong tailwind component. I detected a bit of get the flight accomplished even with this wind going on. So that again is constructive criticism and very true, because I was trying to get the flight accomplished no matter what. All that happened to you, that flight, has happened to the rest of us. Or it will in the future. It was simply your turn to learn that day. And I really wish all of the negative commenters would listen to that from a seaplane instructor who is someone who's arguably the most qualified to comment on this, right? And the other chap that I would like to extend my gratitude to is a chap from Guatemala. He is a commercial airline pilot instructor, 50 years and still flying. He's owned his own Cessna 180 for 30 years. His name is Manuel. And he messaged me on Facebook and said, give me a call. And something about the tone of his message made me want to give him a call, because I get a lot of messages that I don't have time to respond to. But he and I had a half an hour conversation on the phone last night. And I can only describe him as one of the nicest, kindest, most generous humans that I've never met. He's got 38,000 hours as a commercial pilot. Doesn't get much higher than that, I don't think. And he's a commercial airline pilot instructor. And he's still flying. He asked me if I was open to hearing his criticisms, and I said yes, very much so. And he proceeded to very constructively deliver to me what he felt. And he offered me some of his tips and advice. And he said that he's been through the same situation. He talked about arriving at one airport at a gate, and your next flight is already boarded right next door, it's full of passengers, and you're late, and you're in a rush. But he came up with one of the best lines, and I will never forget this line now. Do it slow or no go. How cool is that? Do it slow or no go. He said, if you have not been able to perform all of your checks and everything you normally do without being in a rush, just don't go. Just call no go there and then. Call a delay. Create a delay. Do not allow yourself to be rushed. Do it slow or no go. What a magic piece of advice. Often the best bits of advice are the shortest ones. Thank you everybody who commented, good and bad, because it all feeds into the mix of what gets processed. And in fact, having had a lot of the comments about my proficiency as a pilot the day before I then got my own plane to fly for the first time in 103 days, I was exceptionally careful with that flight. I pre-planned it very carefully, did my threat and error management carefully, and luckily the flight went without incident. And that's the flight which I'll post in real time so people can see whether or not YouTube actually helps or not. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you found that valuable. I'm very hopeful that there are some of you, at least, who are learning. If any of you are learning from my mistakes, my experiences, then it doesn't matter how many people think I'm a bad pilot or shouldn't be on YouTube. It just doesn't matter. I will consider every bit of feedback, no matter how brutally it's delivered, to see whether there's value in it. But when it's unqualified feedback and is unconstructive, there's nothing to take from that. I just disregard it. So thanks again, guys. Fly safe, stay safe. See you on the next video if you want. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.